All right, everyone. Welcome to the call. What is this now, Raksha, the third in the series, is it, that we've been running so far? You did have a fancy name for it. I forget what it was.
Webisode.
A Webisode. Okay.
Really, Colin? Webisode?
Webisode. If you missed the first two, you can check them out on Mighty Networks. There was the first one with Anton Musgrave and then Charles Savage. I thought they were both really inspiring people to go and listen to. They've raised the bar for the conversation today with Zafar, but I've known Zafar for a long time, and I can promise everyone that's dialing in, you're not going to be disappointed. It's going to be fascinating. If Carlsberg made CFOs, if you don't know, Zafar is the CFO of Cell C, and if you remember that old saying, if Carlsberg made CFOs, then they'd make them just like Zaf. So with that, Zaf, Cell C launches in 2001. Pretty much for most of its life, loss-making and seemingly in desperate trouble. March 2020, latest stats that I saw, 8.7 billion of debt. Blue Label and Net1, 45 and 50% shareholding, so 60% in total. Wrote off all of their investments, all 7.5 billion. I think that was in Q4 last year. And you're generally recognized as being the most heavily geared and indebted telco in South Africa. So can you just tell me why on earth you decided to join them in, what was it, late Q4 of 2018 after a successful career at McDonald's?
I enjoy a challenge, Colin. I mean, you've known me long enough. I think for most executives, they're happy to be in a comfort zone and in a routine. I think that that's not the right place to be. For me, I prefer to be uncomfortable. I prefer to be in a place where there's a lot of ambiguity, where there's an opportunity to solve problems, real problems, because that's where you learn the most. I probably got more than 2 or 3 years of experience from being at Cell C for a year, as an example. So if you're an executive and you're in a comfort zone, it's time to move on.
Okay, well, you definitely moved on when you made that switch. But did you go into it expecting something different, or were your eyes wide open as what you were getting yourself into?
Well, I did my research before I got in. I knew exactly what the issues were. I also understood that that kind of business model that Cell C was in at the time was unsustainable. To give an example, between Vodacom and MTN, they spend probably about 20 billion Rand of CapEx a year on their network. And this is now on 4G. This is before looking at even 5G, for example. Telcom's probably spending about 5 billion. We were looking at spending probably in the order of about 3 to 3.5 billion Rand a year. Now, when you overlay that with a service revenue, what we call service revenue, which is our top line revenue, as flat, you can understand that with your costs going up, revenue flat, and CapEx sitting at 3 billion, that you're going to run out of money and have to recapitalize the business pretty much every year. So we looked at doing a different business model, which was to say that we will not spend CapEx in the business. So we're looking to reduce our CapEx completely and look to piggyback off somebody else's network. Yeah, so to give you an analogy, think of a highway to Durban, right? So we've got the N3. What telcos are doing is every single telco has its own highway. Okay, so Vodacom might have, 30 lanes on their highway, MTN 20 lanes, us with 3 lanes, and Telkom probably 2 lanes, as an example. That, again, throughout the world is not a sustainable model. So what you want is probably 1 or 2 highways, which is what most other telcos are doing around the world, and you get your own lane. So what we've done with MTN is we've said to MTN, look, we want a lane on your highway, and we're willing to pay you for it. And so we are substituting CapEx with OpEx. And then as we terminate our 6,000 leases for towers around the country, we'll migrate into MTN's network. So we'll still remain a mobile network operator, but we won't have a radio access network, i.e. towers and worrying about battery and load shedding and the like. We'll just use MTN's.
Was that a difficult decision to go from a CapEx structure, owning the assets, to basically borrowing and renting from everyone else?
Well, I think it was out of necessity. I mean, it's just not impossible to keep raising capital in this type of market. I mean, in a COVID-19 environment, raising capital is going to become immensely more difficult. And how do you now justify to an investor that you're going to make a negative return on the capital you're investing in the company? So we had to really look at innovative ways to change our business model so that we're in a position to be profitable going forward and sustainable. So part of that is to make sure that we were efficient from an operational perspective, and bearing in mind that you are in a very difficult economic environment with 4 competitors in a very small market. So if you're not efficient, you're never going to survive.
Was that difficult to sell to your stakeholders and your investors, or rather, were there portions of your community, your stakeholder network, that didn't agree with that decision, or was it everyone was totally bought in? It was a very simple 1-hour call.
Well, I think that firstly, I don't think people had a choice. I mean, over the 19 years we've been in existence, we've created a 26 billion rand assessed tax loss. To give us some idea of, how bad things were at Cell C. And, it's one of the things that I'll spend a lot of time talking to you about is you got to be honest in your assessment of where you are as a company. It's a bit like being an alcoholic. If you don't admit you're an alcoholic, you're never going to get a solution, right? So, having too much of debt is like being an alcoholic. You can't survive. It's just, for every rand that you generate a profit, you're giving, in our... Sorry, my phone keeps ringing. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, in all honesty. When I was thinking of the title for this session, I came up with this idea of turning the tanker. When I started looking at Cell C in a bit more detail, I think I was being a bit too nice. I perhaps should have called it turning the Titanic. However, the news flow that I'm seeing now and is reported in magazines and papers like Business Day seems a lot more positive. I saw that your CEO Douglas was recently highlighting how your EBITDA has doubled over the back end of last year, how profits are now at 705 million. And there seems to be quite a lot of consensus building that you have turned some sort of corner and the future does look more rosy. Is that reasonable? Is that your assessment, if you're able to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we generated 1 billion rand cash, more cash in the second half of 2019 than in the first half. And that was intentional. So you've had a business that wasn't well run, to be blunt. I mean, you don't create that amount of losses and that amount of debt if you're running a business properly, right? But yeah, it's easy to sit here and blame the previous management team. The reality is there's a lot of structural issues. There's a lot of historical issues. There's a competitive issue where, if you're behind the curve, I'll give an example. I mean, if I went to invest tomorrow and I said to them, give me 10 billion rand a year to spend on CapEx, I still will not catch up with Vodacom in terms of their infrastructure, because they've had, over the last 10 years, and so has MTN, they've had a leg up that, for us to leapfrog them will be practically impossible. Even if we were to invest in 5G, for example, 5G is going to cost the industry in excess of 200 billion rand. And it's going to take some time. But, you can't just build a 5G network overnight. Networks take a long time to build. So it just, the structural issues, the management, the previous management team, all of those things were in existence. And, we came in and we said, well, how do we flip this thing on its head? How do we innovate in a way that we're not trying to compete with 3 other incumbents? You've got Telkom, who are really probably 12 to 18 months behind where we were, because they've got the same problem we've got, which is building up large amounts of debt and your revenue is flat. It's a problem a lot of South African companies are going to go through in the next 5 to 6 years, given where our economy is. So we sat down with the board and our shareholders and we said, well, how do we change this narrative? And we looked at where the opportunities lay. And we looked internationally at some other examples, because sometimes, reinventing the wheel isn't the best strategy. And once we knew what we wanted to do, we kept our strategy really simple. And by simple, I mean there's just 4 things that we needed to do. First one was to make sure we had enough liquidity to keep going. The second one was to look at operational efficiency because we were bloated in certain areas. Costs just didn't, there was not proper management of costs. The network strategy is the third piece, which is the one I'm talking about now in terms of how we used our radio access network. And the fourth one was to recapitalize the business to make it sustainable. So our strategy was really simple. And that's important when you're doing a turnaround. I mean, we haven't really talked about it on this chat, Colin, but turnarounds, you'll never know when your company needs a turnaround because, it's a continuum. It's not a point in time. It's not a binary thing. Do I need a turnaround? Yes or no. It's just a matter of how much of a turnaround you need. And when you're looking at a turnaround, whether it's your company, whether it's your department, whether it's, a product, turnarounds is actually not the right thing to do. It's how do you make your business more profitable, more sustainable, and what are the things that you need to do? And I submit that the simpler you keep it, the better it is, because economics hasn't changed in thousands of years. You still want to make sure that the stuff coming in at the top is more than the stuff leaking out the bottom.
When you say that you've moved, I think it's a really good question here from Marcel. So on behalf of everyone, have you basically now become an MVNO, a mobile virtual network operator? And can you explain for everyone just very quickly what the difference is between an MNO and a either VM or MVNO?
Yeah, so MVNO is First National Bank. So we've got MVNOs on our network. We've got Standard Bank, we've got Virgin Mobile, we've got First National Bank. In fact, First National Bank was rated one of the best networks in South Africa, and they sit on the Cell C network, whereas Cell C was rated 4th, believe it or not. But an MVNO sits on our network, and they utilize our billing systems, our core, our backhaul, all of that. So an MVNO is different in that they look after their own customer. And they collaborate with us, and they buy a piece of our network. So that's what a typical MVNO is. And typically, it'll be like banks, for example, who have a wide customer base, and they're looking to provide a service or additional customer benefits. And they can wrap it up with a whole bunch of other stuff that they have. So that would be your typical MVNO. A mobile network operator is somebody who has spectrum. So Standard Bank doesn't have spectrum, for example. They use ours. So you'd have spectrum, you'd have a billing system, and billing system is actually quite complicated because you got to bill per second. So you got to know at any point in time how much data do you have, how much voice minutes do you have, how much SMS do you have. So that engine that sits in the background is quite complicated. It's not a simple billing like you'd get, on QuickBooks. This is quite a fancy piece of machinery and software that sits behind it. Then we've got what we call a radio access network. So we broadcast our spectrum, and that spectrum is broadcast by various towers. And I don't want to get too technical, but to try and explain it, 2G is very far apart, and the waves between towers allows you to have massive distances between towers. And as you go up through the spectrum from 2G to 3G to 4G, the towers have to become closer and closer together. And to try and explain it a little bit further, if you think of 5G, it's kind of glorified Wi-Fi because the towers have to be that close together. Your latency has to be almost instantaneous because think of a self-driving car. It cannot lose contact with the tower at any point in time, otherwise it will stop. So that's how you progress from 2G all the way through to 5G. And so your radio access network is what sits on those towers. Now we're saying that's the part we don't need. So we're not an MVNO. We're just a mobile network operator that's using somebody else's radio access network. I don't know if that's too technical or too complicated.
No, that's a great explain. So anyway, you've kind of turned the Titanic, it sounds like, and you started going into these 4 pillars. This keep it simple, idea. So you've gone through a little bit about that kind of change in the business focus, the product, the operating model, but you mentioned liquidity and cost and recapitalization. Could you talk a little bit about your journey on those pillars?
Yeah, so the first one was to make sure that we had enough liquidity. I mean, you can't run a business if you don't have liquidity. So we set about sitting down with the banks, explaining to them our strategy. And they were probably the first stakeholder that we engaged with. And we created a platform that gave us enough liquidity to get to a point where we were able to recapitalize the business. So it gave us a kind of runway, if you like. So there's two parts to liquidity. One is obviously getting the lines of credit so you're able to have enough money to pay salaries and cover your costs. The second part of liquidity comes from operational effectiveness. And that's the billion rand that we generated in the second half. And that comes through aggressive cost cutting. You know, when I joined, I was told, what do you know about telco? You come from a place that flips burgers. The reality is costs are costs. And you get good costs, you get bad costs. And it's very, very easy to see what the bad costs are. Just stop all the costs and see what happens. You know, I had people jumping up and down in my office. You can't stop that cost. And I said, well, let's try it for a week. Let's see what happens. And you've got to be brutal about it. So, you know, ruthless execution is key when you're in a position where you don't have liquidity. So we had to be really clear. And the banks wouldn't have given us the lines of credit if we weren't able to make any commitments in terms of cost cutting. So I think that's the
cost cutting. You must have won quite a few enemies, you know, going through that. Or have you managed to do it in a way? Well, how do I ask the question? How have you managed to do the cost cutting without creating too many enemies, either within the firm or the other key stakeholders?
Well, it's actually quite simple. You know, and that's one of the things that's part of how you do any turnaround is active stakeholder management. It sounds like a buzzword, but it's all about making sure that, for example, you sit down with the banks, with the lenders, with the board, with the shareholders, with Exco. You know, people are a key stakeholder. When people understand that your business is in trouble, and you keep telling them that your business is in trouble, you've also got to have a problem-solving mindset. You can't just go around telling people, oh, you know, woe is me, we're in trouble. I mean, people know that you're in trouble. They can see the weather outside. They don't need a weather reporter, right? What they need is somebody to tell them, well, how am I going to change the weather? Or here's an umbrella. Or, you know, how about a raincoat? Or how about you don't go stand in the rain? You know, it's problem solvers that you need at a time like this. And that's what stakeholders want to hear. They don't want to hear your problems. I mean, it's no different to life, really. We all have problems, and you all spend a lot of time telling everybody our problem. But we don't spend a lot of time thinking about what are the solutions to the problem. So we spend a lot of time drafting the strategy, crafting how it looks, sitting down with, for example, MTN, working out what phase 2 would look like for us as a business, and then taking those problems that we'd solved and then selling it to the stakeholders. I mean, take people, for example, Colin. I mean, are the people that got you in the trouble the people that are going to get you out of the trouble? And this is a sore point, right? Because you had people who have, 19, 20 years of experience within Cell C. Some of them have been there for 10 plus years. They're not the ones that are going to get you out of the trouble. So you've got to have a good balance of bringing new people in, consultants, people, you know, good quality individuals. Yes, it's expensive, but you know, if you're going to be cost cutting on that side, you're never going to get out of trouble because you can't execute a strategy without people. And so we spent a lot of time. I mean, we changed our entire Exco, for example. Everyone on our Exco is brand new. We had to do it because right now that's what the business needs, right? We've brought in consultants, and trust me, consultants are not cheap. But they're the ones that helped us craft the strategy and made sure that we managed our stakeholders in a particular way. They're not going to be there forever, but we made sure that their skills transfer from those consultants. And then from a cost-cutting perspective, I mean, you know in your heart of hearts, do you really need that business day subscription or, you know, this cost that people have in the business and have had for a number of years and get comfortable with those costs? You've got to turn the whole thing upside down. And that's why we were able to save probably about 2.5 billion rand worth of costs.
So I love what you said before, because this idea of just simply stopping things and seeing what happens, this is not your standard operating model for most leaders that I've come across.
Oh, well, try it. See what happens. What's the worst that can happen? Somebody's going to jump up and down, write you a nasty letter. And then you see what happens. You got to understand that when you're in a distressed business, your price book is probably the worst that it's ever going to be. Because trust me, people are adding significant margin. I'm not getting the same pricing as Vodacom is getting. There's no way. But am I being overcharged? Absolutely. So we clean it up, find alternative suppliers. Headcount. I mean, we're going through a Section 189 now. It's amazing. People say, well, if that person leaves, the whole business is going to fall down. It's not true. Nobody's indispensable, not me. If I'm not indispensable and I don't consider myself indispensable, what makes somebody else indispensable? And I know it sounds cold and calculated, but the reality is my fiduciary duty is to the company first. If I don't make sure that the company survives, nobody's going to have a job. So, you got to say, well, what is your priority? How are you putting that priority first? And what are the things that you need to do to make that happen? And again, I'll say it, without people, it's impossible to execute a strategy.
How do you keep your people on board? This must have been a quite a radically different approach. So as the costs have ballooned and there's been complacently and there's this view that just switching something off is going to be painful, you managed to cut through the red tape. 3 months of pointless analysis is stopped and you just simply stop and see what happens. But this must have been a significant cultural change for a lot of the people that are in your team and affected by this type of decision making. How did you manage that and get them on board?
Yeah, so the first thing is you got to have a proper governance structure. Now, everybody who thinks of governance thinks of rules and a stick and the sort. But governance can be an enabler. So what you want to do is be able to put in a governance structure that enables you to make quick decisions, not holds you back. And what the governance does is it gives you oversight. So one of the first things I did was formed a liquidity committee. It's chaired by an independent non-executive director. And this liquidity committee meets every week. And I've got to answer to that committee. What are we doing on liquidity? Where are we with this? Where are we with that? What are the latest letters of demand that are coming? What are the court actions that are in play, et cetera, et cetera. At one stage through June and July last year, we were having daily liquidity meetings because, as a director, you have this issue of reckless trading and you cannot be reckless trading because you could end up in jail. And what a liquidity committee does is it gives you the governance structure. I mean, we've had lawyers on those calls, for example, where they tell you, look, you've got to look 6 months ahead. Do you have enough liquidity to pay off your debts? And so an assessment is made at every one of those meetings. And normally what you'd have in a governance scenario is a whole lot of guys sitting around the table for 4 hours. There'd be a full agenda. There'd be a pack as thick as a phone book that people were able to plow through. Our meetings were half an hour, okay? Very quick, very focused, and it was focused purely on solving a problem. Okay, so we've got a problem on this creditor. Well, how do we deal with it? What are the things that we can do? What are the solutions? And we brought in people that could find the solutions for us. So it's a very different way of thinking of governance. And when you have governance structures, you have what's called business credibility, because then people believe that you're doing the right stuff. Otherwise, you're just a cowboy, right? So we spent a lot of time on that. Probably 3 months in, we formed an investment committee headed by Stephen Kossoff, who, again, respectable, has a lot of credibility, and they looked at the recapitalization. And their mandate was very, very clear. Again, I answered to that committee. So when you are able to use governance structures as an enabler in your business, it makes it much easier to get your stakeholders aligned to what you're trying to do. Because you're not trying to, fleece somebody or do something. And funny enough, creditors love that kind of stuff because they understand that you're doing things properly. You're not just saying, well, I'm not going to pay you because I want to pay somebody else. And so I think if you are able to put in those types of governance structures, and we were very clear what we were looking at. I mean, we changed our board as an example, not just Exco. So you've got to be clear about who are the people that are going to take you on a journey to get out of the way, because they'll help you sell that to everyone, including your employees.
How do you make sure that these committees, these governance structures, don't themselves become mud, preventing you from actually moving forward?
Well, choose them properly, choose the people properly, and make it very clear to them. I mean, I'm quite harsh on those committees, because if they stray, I say to them, guys, you're not helping. You know, and you have really what I would call difficult conversations. And, you know, people respect you when you direct with them, and there's no pussyfooting around. You got to be clear when there's a problem and you feel that they're crossing a line. I mean, the danger with some of those committees is they try to do management's job. And even if I sniff them trying to tell me how to do my job, I step right in. And I'm saying, guys, you're stepping outside of your mandate. I need your help, but not in that way. So I think really having tough conversations with the governance structures is really important.
So big decisions that impact lots of people, difficult decisions that impact lots of people. You're still looking surprisingly young. How do you manage your stress levels on something which does impact people for good or for bad so rapidly?
So, look, I get a lot of energy out of doing what I do. Ambiguity and places where things are not quite perfect is what I love. You know, it energizes me. I think that's the first thing. So I'm kind of drawn to that. I was the CFO at Ellerines before. So I like these tough gigs. But there's two things. One is exercise. I mean, you've got to keep yourself fit. If you can't keep yourself fit, you're not going to keep your business fit. If you can't look after yourself, you're not going to look after business. It's as simple as that. So I have a stationary bike. I get on it and I do high impact intensity training, make sure that I stay fit and healthy. The other one is nutrition. I mean, when you're stressed and you're in a position where you're working, 20-hour days, for example, you got to be really disciplined about nutrition. So for me, very big breakfast, oats and honey. I have smoothies at lunch. I have dinner with my family probably 7 days a week. I make that a rule because my family energizes me. And anytime I can spend time with them is good time for me. So a big family meal at dinner. And then you just watch what you eat. It's easy to fall off the wagon when it comes to eating. I don't drink alcohol, for example. You just got to make sure that for keeping your energy levels up throughout the day, because it's surprising how much energy your brain takes. I would say more than 60%. I don't know what the science is, but when your brain is working at top speed, it sucks up a lot of energy. And if you're not keeping hydrated, if you're not taking the proper nutrition, then you're going to struggle. And if you're going to struggle, the people around you are going to struggle. So for me, exercise, nutrition, keeping your stamina and keeping your energy levels up is what keeps you going.
So let's, we've already covered quite a few tips, I think, for people, not just for turnarounds, but for managing businesses in general. KISS, keep it simple, stupid, that famous acronym. I think you started with that. So you've got the 4-pillar strategy of liquidity, cost, the network strategy, and the recapitalization. Maybe we'll ask you a few questions on the journey and recapitalization, because I think that one's fascinating. We've got health, the stress, making sure you get enough sleep and liquid. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but I see so many people not doing it. The number one, by the way, just for interest, the number one method for extending longevity is getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
So very, very simple. Not enough people do it. Active stakeholder management across all stakeholders, staff, investors, customers, the teams that are working for you, any other regulators that are sitting out there. Could you expand on that one? Because I think that one is, you said it's a buzzword, but it must be incredibly time consuming and feel at times like it's not bringing a huge amount of value.
Well, there's another piece that I want to talk about very quickly, and that's honesty. When you're in a distressed business, and EOH has been in a position like this, you lack credibility, right? It's this thing about trust and credibility. When you talk to banks, when you talk to auditors, people just don't take you seriously. And being honest in your assessment of where you are and what's going on in the business is really important. And that honesty cannot come at the cost of blaming the previous management team, as an example, because it's easy. I mean, it's easy for me to say, hey, the last management team screwed this up. they had this business for 5 years. I mean, look where they ended up, right? That's an easy pass, but it's not the right thing to do. So when you're managing your stakeholders, you have to be honest, because that's what people want. They want honesty. They don't want a BS story. They don't want somebody to say to them, oh, everything's fine, don't worry about it, we've got enough cash, we'll pay you on time, etc., etc. I mean, I've had tough conversations with our creditors, but you know what? Ultimately, they didn't do anything. They didn't pull the plug. You know why? Because I was honest with them. I said to them, guys, as I get money in, I'm going to pay you. Not a big deal. And they said, well, when are you going to pay me? Make a commitment. So we made a commitment. We're going to pay you $5 million a week until the debt is extinguished. And you know what? You keep to that commitment. If you're going to change it, pick up the phone, speak to the CFO and say to him, look, I can't pay you your $5 million this week. I have an issue. Give me a couple of more days. And people understand that because you're being honest with them, you explain to them the position, and they understand that at the end of the day, you're going to see yourself out of this mess. Okay? So part of stakeholder management is being really honest with people, staff, board of directors, auditors, and you don't have to do it in a nasty way. You don't have to be, saying, I don't know what I can say, but you don't have to be an arsehole. Okay? There's no need for that. What you want to do is be really honest about your assessment and tell them what the score is, and continuous communication. So, we behave like a listed company. So we send out our 6-month results. We go on road shows. We have a results presentation, which we share with key stakeholders. We write them letters, individual interactions with key people like our MVNOs. I mean, First National Bank, they've stuck with us through this whole thing. They've been really good partners, and we speak to them constantly. We've got MVNOs in other banks looking to join us because we're one of the biggest MVNOs in the country. They're saying, well, let us know when we can come and join you because we want to help you succeed because you guys are doing the right thing. You're being honest. We understand what your journey looks like, and we want to be part of that journey. And it's amazing the goodwill you get from other businesses when you're honest with them.
Can you share anything of your travels? Earlier in the year, you didn't seem to be setting foot in South Africa.
I've been to China 5 times, been to the UK 3 times, been to Lebanon, I've been to Beirut. Some of our bonds are held in Beirut, 60%. It's a funny story. I mean, I left on a Sunday afternoon. I did Joburg, Dubai, Beijing, Shenzhen. Shenzhen drove to Hong Kong to Dubai, then to Beirut, back to Dubai, back to Johannesburg by Saturday morning. So that was one trip, and I did that 3 times. The first time we did Beirut, I mean, we landed there. Mohammed Hariri is an ex-chairman of Cell C. His cousin is Saad Hariri, who was the president of Lebanon. My first experience in Lebanon is we arrived there in the hotel we're staying at. There's a building behind us that's riddled with bullet holes, and it's just too costly to bring it down. But that's my entry into Beirut. And we go to this office where these bondholders sit. And my job is to tell them that we're not paying them interest. So needless to say, that conversation did not go down well. And then we hot-footed it back to the airport to get out of the country as quickly as we could. But again, I make light of it. The reality is they just wanted, I still remember Mohammed Hariri saying to me, you're the 5th management team to walk through these doors to tell us that, everything's going to be fine. And I said, actually, I didn't come here to tell you everything's fine. I came here to tell you I'm not paying you. It's a slightly different prospect. But, again, they appreciate the honesty because initially it's that whole curve of despair, whatever you call it. There's denial and then finally acceptance. And you've got to go through that. And if you don't have empathy for people who've put money into your business and believe the previous management team, you got to be empathetic. Guys have lost a lot of money. You mentioned Blue Label and Net1. Again, with them, we were really honest. We said, back us in terms of taking this thing forward. We know you've lost a lot of money. And, frankly, there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can try and do is recover as much as we can for you. So if you believe in our business plan, which we did, we called in Deloitte in the UK to help us. They did a fantastic job. And because we had, investors in the US, in the UK, in Lebanon, and in China, we had to look at international people to help us. But they did a fantastic job. We did the business plan. We talked about the business model, and we sold that to our stakeholders.
Can I talk about your book? Oh, I seem to have started talk. I'm assuming that you'll let me ask you a question about your book.
What book?
Oh well, it's out of the bag now. But I was looking at the breakdown of the chapters that you've got in there, and the book at the moment, the working title. So everyone, watch out for this. It's The Art of the Turnaround. I don't
think it's going to be a bestseller, Colin.
I don't know. I really like some of the sections because they go far beyond just turnarounds. One of the ones which I loved, back to that Carlsberg CFO, is you say forget about spreadsheets. Could you expand on that?
You know, if I sat in my office and looked at spreadsheets the whole day, Cell C would be in more trouble, because it's easy and comfortable to sit behind spreadsheets. I've had the good fortune to spend a lot of time with mergers and acquisitions. And the number of investors that I've seen come with their spreadsheets and tell me how to run a business is just phenomenal. They've never ran a business in their lives before, but they think that on their little spreadsheet, which is really complicated, has lots of tabs on it, and lots of versions and macros and whatever else are going on in that spreadsheet. You can't trust the spreadsheet to run your business. I mean, when you're doing a 5-year plan, for example, the variables that go into it are immense. I prefer to have forecasts that are easy, minimize the number of variables. I mean, you can get really complicated. And some of these investment types, my God, they're complicated. And I look at this lot and I say, show me the cash, guys. Don't show me spreadsheets. Because I cannot go to a bank manager who I owe money to and say to him, here's a spreadsheet, stick that in the bank account. Never going to work. So, as a CFO, you got to be in the business. You got to understand what drives the top line, where the money comes in, where the money goes. And this thing of cutting yourself to profit, it doesn't work. You can cut, the easy stuff. And when you get into the muscle, it becomes really difficult. But you can't keep cutting costs. At some point, you're going to have to look after revenue. So you got to see it in that way. And that's why the strategy is focused on looking at a network strategy that drives revenue, because people aren't going to believe you. I've had to raise capital for this recapitalization, and I know you want to talk about that. In recapitalizing a business, new money wants to know how much they're going to get out and how secure is their money. And it is harder than you think. I mean, you can't do that on a spreadsheet. I mean, they're going to run their own numbers based on my assumptions. So I'm going to do my business plan. I love it when a bank manager tells me my business plan is too conservative, as an example, because they're going to run their own numbers. And typically they'll want a 1.5 times cover on their money. They'll look at an EBITDA coverage ratio that's insane. And when you're distressed, they add on a whole lot more. It's that old story, a bank will give you an umbrella for a rainy day and then take it away as soon as it starts raining. And if you don't understand that, and if you're not going to get that out of a spreadsheet. I'm sorry.
A couple of questions that I just wanted to pick up on there. First one is from Dion Govender. How will Cell C be able to build a differentiated IoT value proposition?
Well, I think IoT is a funny one, because everybody talks about IoT, but it's very, very difficult to monetize it. For us, most of our opportunity now is in looking after our existing customer base. If you look at our results for 2019, we lost close to 3 million customers. Okay? Yet our profitability went up. And that's where our focus is. On IoT, there's a lot of other companies out there that are doing it. For now, we are focused on making sure we're good to our existing customers and that we've got the right customers. So I think IoT, we've never been good at innovating on those kind of levels. I think our innovation has been more in the mobile network space. WhatsApp bundles, and we've led the way on pricing. I mean, you would have seen, for example, the Competition Commission, our pricing was low to start with. So I think there's a lot more opportunity in our business. And I think that to go after IoT right now, I'd rather focus on recovering our business. And if there's an opportunity on IoT, I'd rather partner with somebody else that's got the strategy for it and work with them.
So that's awesome. I don't know what this means. Maybe you do. This is from Vince. Is this new approach similar to ICASA's proposed WOAN?
No, it's different. So the WOAN that he's referring to is very different. So where South Africa found itself is that a lot of the valuable spectrum that was needed for mobile was sitting in free-to-air TV and radio. And so South Africa embarked on what they called a digital migration, where they were moving people off that spectrum, SABC, etc. And as you know, that didn't go well. So what mobile companies have had to do is use their existing spectrum really smartly. Obviously, it comes at huge capital cost. But I don't want to bore you with the details of what the WOAN represents. I think the issue here is that for us, we've got valuable spectrum. We want to make sure that we monetize that spectrum in the best way possible. And there's a thing called congestion, and it's a really important milestone when you're looking at how you measure profitability in an organization, in a mobile network. Because if a customer can't complete a call, you can't get revenue. And when you have congestion on a network, and we've had lots of congestion because we had customers that just were not profitable. When you start to remove those customers, a funny thing happens. It's not like selling burgers. Your profits go up because now you're giving your customer an opportunity to utilize his bandwidth. Okay, and by doing that, you increase revenue and increase margin. Now, for us, by losing 2.9 million customers, we reduced congestion massively. We took off. I'll give an example.
Was that a deliberate strategy, Zafar, to use 2.
Absolutely.
So can you expand on that? Because so many companies, large and small, try to hold on to their customers. They get very itchy when you tell them that, why don't you get rid of your loss leading customers who are giving you nothing?
Well, you see, the thing is that when you are a Vodacom, an MTN, or a telecom, you've got a network that's a fixed cost. And so you want to fill that network. If you fill it for 1 cent, you're making a profit, right? Because you're covering a fixed cost. When you're moving to a variable cost model, that doesn't make sense, okay? Because now I'm paying for capacity on MTN's network. Why would I want an unprofitable customer? Because now I don't have to fill the network. Because for me, it's about reducing congestion and making sure that I give my customers that are willing to pay me a better service. And we're already seeing it in terms of the stats. The problem is that mobile network operators haven't been able to disrupt themselves. And all of the measurements are on how many customers do you have, what is your market share based on customer, what is your churn rate, what is your ARPU. And I said, actually, that's rubbish. I just want to see what my EBITDA is doing. Because if I can't put it in the bank, why should I? And the thing is, the paying customers that are getting, that are paying me for the value of the network deserve a better deal than those customers that are multi-SIMmed, that have, they have 4 devices and use the ones that are the cheapest, or whatever the case may be. Or God forbid, people having to change SIMs every time they want to do something. But that's not the customer we want. It costs much more to hold on to that customer. So for us, we were deliberate. I mean, I'll give an example. Internet Solutions, we're using 20% of our network and generating 0.5% of our revenue. So we cut it. Internet Solutions were not happy. But hey, we're not a charity. We've got our own problems.
Right, a brave call. That must have required some of your governance committees to step in and give a bit of support there.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that when sometimes it's good to be in a distressed situation, because you can make those calls and say, sorry, guys, we got to do this. I think it's a lot harder to do if you're a business that's sustainable and carrying on, because to cut a customer like that will take some balls to do. But when you're distressed, it's slightly easier. If that makes sense. It sounds counterintuitive, but...
Gosh, we've only got 12 minutes and there's so many questions. Failure. Another point that you've talked about with me in the past, failure is an option. You also mentioned it on your call with Mark Barnes in the Economist webinar. Could you explain how you believe that failure is an important part of your role, your career, and what you're doing at Cell C and other organizations?
Yeah, you know, I'm 51 years old. The generation we grew up in is failure is not an option. I mean, I became a chartered accountant, and if you failed, I mean, you know, to get a decent job, you had to be first time pass. You had to be you couldn't have a blemish anywhere on your CV. I've got lots of blemishes and pimples on my CV, and people love that, and they love it because I've got scars, right? And scars are important for businesses today because they want somebody who's rugged and can get the job done. They want problem solvers, and you're not going to be a problem solver if you haven't failed. The thing with failure is if you're going to fail, fail quickly, and make sure you've got a safety net. So I'm not saying fail just for the sake of failing to see how it feels. I mean, that's not the right way to do it. But just make sure you've got the proper safety nets in place. And it's also how you define failure. You know, I was a CFO at Ellerines, and Ellerines went into business rescue. You could say that was a failure. I mean, at a point, it was a dark time in my career. I never thought I'd work again. And there were two groups of people that were swirling around Ellerines at the time. Number one were M&A people that were looking for a cheap asset, you know, buying cheap stock, you know, distressed asset that's going under. The second one was headhunters. And they were looking at people who were quality and who could do a job. And funny enough, they picked up on me. And I said to myself, I never thought I'd work again. The reality was that there were a whole bunch of people looking at me with a different, you know, pair of eyes that I was looking at. And that's when I realized that, you know, if this thing of failure, we need to move on from it. Failure is not failure. And I think the millennials get it because they understand it. You know, the generation that I grew up in, you had to work in one company for 40 years. I was at Tongaat Hewlett, believe it or not, Colin. I mean, talk about troubled companies. I was there for 10 years. It was before all the trouble started there. But man, I tell you, people stayed there for 30, 40 years. Those days are gone now. You can't do that anymore. You got to build a career. And part of building a career is to learn how to fail.
So I've been looking forward to this question now. We met, I think because you came across me because I wrote an article on Rain.
Yeah.
And I was comparing Rain to Cell C and the other three major operators and suggesting that they had radically more chances of being successful for numerous reasons, but top of the list was they had a very clear purpose, and their purpose really, in summary, is to democratize access to communication and the internet. And therefore, in that approach, it explained a lot of the strategies that they were running, why they're not rolling out across the whole of South Africa, why they're not worrying about old technologies, why they have invested in certain bandwidths, and so on, and their pricing model as well, you know, at 50 Rand per gigabyte, which is still, even with the watchdogs pushing down the operators' prices, you know, way, way cheaper. And the suggestion was that these purposeful organizations are going to outperform in the medium to long term versus these profit-hungry incumbents. And I never really can quite remember whether you agreed with that and or whether it's something that you're trying to push Cell C towards being more purpose-driven as opposed to just simply survival and profit-focused.
Yeah, actually, that's a good question, and you're right. I believe in purposeful organizations. If you don't have purpose and the right purpose, it's very, very hard to be profitable because purpose does drive profit. But if you are focused first on profit and then purpose, then I think it's cart before the horse. Now, I'm not sure that Rain is profitable. I think scale is going to be their biggest challenge. We on the other end of the spectrum in that we've got scale, but we're not profitable. So I think the medium lies somewhere in the middle. For us, it's not about us copying their model. I think for us is we are charting our own path, as it were, that has some elements of what Rain is doing. But the common denominator is purpose. Now, our purpose is to look after our existing customer. And it's something I learned at McDonald's. Your customer is king, and you do everything you can to make sure your customer is happy. And Cell C hasn't always been good at that. I think it's been better than some of the other networks, but I think we can be better. So for me, it's if you put the customer at the center of everything you do, then you're a purposeful organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Amazon aren't going to disagree with you there for sure.
Absolutely.
But that's not quite going as far as looking to democratize data. So is this suggesting you're not going to be pushing your data prices down too much in the next 6 months?
No, I think
coming up to renew.
I think the problem you're going to have, it was the same with voice, right? Voice is going to become free eventually because it's been replaced by data. People do WhatsApp calls, Zoom calls. The Zoom call is over an internet connection, right? It's not over a mobile network through a voice. It's charging your voice. So it's all about data. And I think data is the one that's running. I mean, the industry stats, data is running at 60% plus growth per annum. And if your data prices are staying the same and you've got a growth in volume that's 60%, I mean, you can do the math. It's not a profitable business model. The problem is that you've got 4 incumbents with Rain and some of the other guys that are trying to disrupt. And it's just a lot of competitors in a very small market. I mean, our total population is just 57 million compared to some of the US, for example, sitting at 320 million. And in the US, you've got 2 major operators and a whole lot of MVNOs. It's the same in Europe. You typically will have not more than 2 big operators. So I think the medium lies somewhere in the middle. You just cannot have that many operators. It's a question of economics. So for us, we're going to try and be smaller and more nimble and more innovative, but look after our customer. I think that's kind of where we're at, and being a purposeful organization doing that.
All right, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'll do some rapid fire, quick yes/nos, and then try to leave you with 4 minutes or 3 minutes to summarize, back on the sort of 5 or 6 important takeaways for people either thinking about doing, going to have to do turnaround strategies from your learnings. First was Jayesh Ranchod. How successful? Can you elaborate on your fiber strategy? That's going to take too long. I might ask you if you can give me that feedback afterwards. Andre Esterhazen, are you looking to grow revenue in business customers, or is the focus still on growing consumer subscriber numbers?
So we're going to continue to reduce subscriber numbers, and our revenue will go up as a result. It sounds counterintuitive, but because congestion will come down, our revenue will go up, and we're also looking at other revenue streams.
Is there talk, or could it be that Cell C, this one's from Letlotlo, serving niche markets and harnessing? So I think if I rephrase the question, is the focus at the moment to narrow the markets and the content that you supply, as opposed to before where you tried to do everything for everybody?
Yeah, I think on the mobile side, it's to narrow. So mobile and data would be to narrow, and then look at expanding on other revenue line items. So collaborating with other companies. So for example, we shut down Black. Black was costing us 500 million rand a month. It was the easiest decision I ever had to make. And now we'll replace that with something else that's content driven.
Izana, what trends have you seen since lockdown, if any?
Oh, data has gone through the roof. I mean, it's actually quite crazy because people, I mean, take a healthcare worker that's sitting in clicks, right, and serving a customer. They've got 3 kids at home, and each one has a mobile phone, and they chew through data like you cannot believe. And that's what the biggest trend has been. And it's amazing. South Africa has 400,000 fiber connections. It's actually just too little. So, getting connections, fiber connections to every home in South Africa has got to be a big priority.
All right, 12:57. I promised you'd be able to leave at the hour.
Yeah.
3 minutes. Do you want to just repeat back, or anything that you've missed, what you think are the kind of key principles and steps that all leaders should take when they're doing turnarounds? Yeah, so
firstly, thanks for the opportunity, Colin. I love this stuff, and I love sharing this with people. It's something that I'm passionate about. So thanks for the opportunity. I think the first one is identify what is a turnaround. I mean, EOH and Cell C kind of are in the similar kind of boat, if you like. But turnarounds are not all about companies in distress. It's also about where are you in your department, in your product line. Turnarounds can be anything. And there's always an opportunity to turn around. And the word turnaround, as I said earlier, isn't the right word for it. It's about optimization, right? And along that continuum, you need to identify where you are. So I think that's the first thing. Second thing is you got to actively manage all your stakeholders. And I spoke about that in detail, and that's a key takeaway. You can't do this in a vacuum. The third one is you really need to keep it simple. Your strategy has to be simple. I mean, I've explained our strategy to you in 4 pillars, and I did it in less than 30 seconds, and you understood it. That's how simple your strategy needs to be. And you don't want to overcomplicate stuff. People just have a habit of complicating the easiest things. Don't do that. Just keep it simple. And, you know, big turnarounds around the world have happened on simple strategies. Take Amazon and some of the other ones that you mentioned. The fourth one is that you got to look for the cash. Liquidity management is key when you're doing a turnaround. You cannot do it without the right liquidity in your business. And then the other one is obviously making sure that you keep fit and you keep your stress levels down. Make sure that you're not, you know, trying to do too much to too many people. Spending family time, you know, when you're in a lockdown, this is the best time to spend with family. And then reevaluate your priorities. And then be ruthless in execution. You know, once you make the decision, go with it. Don't be afraid to fail. Just get on with it. You can sit and pontificate and write up beautiful documents and do fancy spreadsheets, but it just doesn't really help. And then the last one is, and I call it, when you speak the truth, you never have to remember a lie. Always, always speak the truth. It's the easiest thing to do, but people just hate doing it because they feel that they're going to offend somebody. Be direct, be truthful, be honest, and respect and be empathetic when you are being truthful, so that you're not coming across as brash and arrogant. And I think those are the key takeaways, Colin. I don't think I've missed out any.
No, that's wonderful. I love the last one as well. This is definitely, you know, following that vein, being the second best interview I've done. So, Zaf, thank you very much on behalf of everyone at EOH to give an hour of your time with the bedlam that's happening at the moment is just truly appreciated. And for everyone on the call, expect later today or tomorrow for us to download the recording. Hopefully we should have the chat and the questions as well and be able to load it back up into Exponential EOH on Mighty Networks. So I can't tell you what the call is for next week because I can't remember, but it's bound to be good. Again, I'll post about that in Mighty Networks so you can find out more there. So thank you very much, everyone. Have an awesome day.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, everyone.